It's absolutely outstanding at what Oppo have achieved with the Reno13 Pro 5G, and I actually think it's among one of the best smartphones out there available right now, specifically given its overall price tag of £649 in the UK. Now this will give you 12GB of RAM and 512GB of internal storage. Now this is not to be confused with the regular 13 or the F or the FS models, which have got lower specifications and therefore come in at a cheaper price point. Nonetheless, in this review, we'll be concentrating on the Reno13 Pro 5G and to see how it compares with some of its key competitors. So to kick things off, I would just like to point out that within the box, you'll have the smartphone with a USB Type-C to Type-A cable. You will not, however, find a Super VOOC charger or indeed a protective case, something that you might want to consider, which I'll draw upon very shortly. Now, in terms of the overall design itself, it's actually really nice to hold. It actually feels pretty premium and is quite elegant. It's available in two colors, Plume Purple, which has actually got a quite nice rear effect, and also the Graphite Grey, which is pictured. It weighs in at just 195 grams and therefore actually feels pretty lightweight. It's also quite nice to see that you have got slightly curved edges at the front, therefore making it a little bit better to hold in hand and also use, at least what I find subjectively. Now there are also physical buttons that are found on the right hand side, and they've also got a good sort of actuation. Now on a side note, I would just like to point out that if you do want to differentiate between the Reno13 Pro, the non-Pro, the F and the FS model, you want to look at the flash module that is found at the rear of the smartphone. Indeed, it actually differs. I just thought to highlight this in case you're looking at the phone on the second-hand market, and therefore makes it actually quite easy to know which phone you're buying. Now the phone itself is also IP68 and 69 rated, therefore meaning that it can also be submerged and suffer from quite a lot of harsh treatment. So therefore means that it's pretty rugged and you don't have to worry about it. In fact, Oppo have also built in a means of removing and extracting water from the smartphone, and this is a certain setting that you can enable. You can find it via the notification tray or indeed the phone manager app. Now, the reason I highlight this is because the phone has actually got underwater photo capabilities, which I'll be touching upon further down in this review. Speaking of which, the glass is protected with Corning's Gorilla Glass 7i, which you'll actually also find in Oppo's flagship devices, such as the Find X8 Pro. This will give you scratch resistance, and also there is a pre-applied screen protector out the box, which is a nice little touch. Now my main complaint when it comes to its overall design is that it doesn't sit flush on a table, and this is due to the camera configuration at the rear, which therefore means that it's going to be rocking around. And given the fact that you do not have a case that's included within the box, it's something that you might want to consider, namely if you're going to be frequently putting your phone on a table and therefore using it. Similarly, I find that the location of the under-display optical fingerprint sensor is somewhat awkwardly placed. It's quite far down, therefore makes it a little bit hard to actually initiate every single time. Thankfully, however, the optical sensor is actually lightning quick, although isn't exactly as advanced of some ultrasonic sensors out there on the market. You can also pair this up with Face Unlock, although it's worth bearing in mind that you do not have 3D biometric data due to the fact that you have got no sort of ToF sensor at the front. Now on the notion of that black slab, you have got a 6.83-inch 120Hz AMOLED display, which is actually very fluid and also vivid. In terms of the overall color accuracy, it's actually pretty good as well, therefore making it quite handy when it comes to photo editing. It's also got a resolution of 1272 by 2800, so everything does actually look pretty sharp should you wish to choose the highest resolution available. Now, in terms of the overall brightness, it got up to 562 nits, and in auto mode went up to 764 nits. This effectively translates to the phone being actually pretty bright in quite bright sunlight conditions, although here it won't quite compete with some more flagship devices out there on the market. As for its minimum brightness, it gets all the way down to 1.92 nits, showing good sort of range, and therefore means that you can use this phone in a completely pitch black environment without having too much eye strain. So flipping over the phone, let's talk about its rear camera configuration, which I do think is one of the key selling points of the Reno13 Pro 5G. Here you've got a 50 megapixel f1.8 wide lens with OIS, a 50 megapixel f2.8 telephoto with OIS and 3.5 times optical zoom, and an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide. Now first off, in terms of the latter, it's not exactly something to shout about. The overall image will look a little bit blurred out, specifically if comparing it to the main camera lens. And indeed over here, the ultra-wide is useful in terms of having it included, although it's not something to rely on. However, the main camera lens gives you absolutely stonkingly good results. The overall image tone seems to be bright and quite vivid, and while it does seem to have a slightly warmer tone, namely when it comes to the overall skin tones, it does actually give you a pretty pleasurable viewing experience. Furthermore, if you combine this with the telephoto lens, which provides you up to 3.5 times optical zoom and up to a whopping 120 times digital zoom, you have got absolutely exceptional results. I was actually left jaw-dropped at how this phone was able to compete with not only phones within its price category, for example the likes of the Poco F7 Ultra, but also flagship tier phones, including for example the likes of the Oppo Find X8 Pro. Yes, indeed, that 120 times digital zoom does a really good job. And while AI photography does kick in automatically, and unfortunately from what I'm aware can't be fully disabled, does actually do a pretty good job of sharpening the image without actually detracting from what you can actually see with your naked eye. The only caveat over here is that when it comes to the macro capabilities, in other words, getting really close to your subject and enabling the macro mode, which will automatically kick in, it doesn't quite compete with some of its main rivals. Nonetheless, it's good to see it's included, and given the fact that most people won't be shoving their phone right close to a subject, I suspect it will be a non-issue. Now the phone also does a tremendous job in low light conditions, and sure enough it does start struggling when it comes to those higher zoom capabilities, but here when it came to looking at how the image was actually portrayed, I was left yet again absolutely outstanding at to what the manufacturer has been able to achieve, namely again at this price point. Comparing, contrasting it with some of its key competitors, it gives you a much better sort of richer tone. The overall contrast when it comes to deep blacks and also lighter images is actually really well done, and in some instances even competes with flagship tier phones out there on the market. Now the same could be said about its overall selfie camera, where here you've got a 50 megapixel f2.0 wide lens with autofocus. It actually does a really good job in getting good amount of detail, and given the fact you've even got 2 times zoom, which I do find quite odd to say the least, because I'm not really sure why someone would zoom in 2 times over when it comes to the selfie camera, it is still a really nice inclusion, therefore giving it good sort of versatility. Yet again, the color tones are slightly a bit on the warmer side, but it doesn't really bother me. In terms of my skin tones, it could have looked a little bit more natural, but again here I do really appreciate what Oppo have achieved with the Reno13 Pro 5G. I also love the fact that in terms of the portrait mode, not only can you adjust the depth of field while taking the photo, but you can also adjust it after you've taken the photo. Yet again giving you better sort of versatility and allowing you to customize the image to your own heart's content. Now yet again when it comes to low light selfies, it actually does a pretty good job. Namely if you were to enable the flash mode, which effectively will light up the screen in white and therefore give you a pretty nice sort of image. It doesn't seem overly blown out like some of its competitors, and will also prevent some extra bit of noise from occurring because the lens has a little bit less trouble of capturing that data. Equally, I found that the recording capabilities were stonkingly good. See, at the front and at the rear, you can shoot 4K and 1080p at 30 and 60 FPS, and also 720p at 30 FPS. Yes, indeed, in comparison to the vast majority of its rivals, namely at its price point, you can still shoot 4K 60 FPS with the front selfie camera. And this effectively gives it a massive upper hand, not only when it comes to the overall detail, but also in terms of how well the overall image actually looks. Yes, here when it came to doing my own test in normal and low light conditions, I was actually left very impressed. And in this respect, I do think a lot of people who are taking videos with the selfie camera will actually be pleasantly surprised. Similarly over here, when it comes to the rear camera configuration, it can also shoot slow-mo videos at 1080p at 120 and 480 FPS and 720p at 240 and a whopping 960 FPS. So yes, over here you'll be able to get those slow-mo shots, and you've also got motion tracking capabilities as well, which are built in and therefore make it all that bit better. Frankly, over here, when it came to shooting with the rear camera lenses, I actually found the overall video recording capabilities to be really impressive. not only in terms of the overall camera shape, but also in terms of the amount of detail and light that was also captured, both in normal lighting conditions and low light conditions. Although it's worth noting over here that in the latter, you will actually find that it starts struggling, namely if you start zooming in, because here you've got up to 7 times digital zoom that is available while you are recording. Although I would like to note that the ultra-wide lens is not available at all when you're recording at 1080p or 4K. Now, so far everything is really impressive. However, there is a key area where the Oppo does fall short in comparison to some of its key competitors, and that is when it comes to raw performance. Because here you've got a 4nm Mediatek Dimensity 8350 chipset, which has got an octa-core CPU and a Mali G615-MC6 GPU with 12GB of RAM. Running Geekbench 6, I noted a single core score of 1323 and a multi-core score of 3969. As you'll be able to see from this graph, it really can't compete with some of the other phones out there in the market, be it mid-tier or indeed when it comes to flagships. Here, in terms of GFX bench, I also noted a FPS from 20 up to 245. Yet again over here, it doesn't exactly quite excel. Now, don't get me wrong, benchmarks are not everything, and when it comes to day-to-day usage, I actually found it to be pretty impressive. App launches felt very fluid, and that's also thanks to the fact you had that 120Hz display, and when it came to multitasking, it didn't feel to stutter either. Although I would like to say over here that when it came to setting up the phone, I did notice a few crashes, which yet again is something that I wish that Oppo would address, because it's something I also noted in their flagship Find X8 Pro. Nonetheless, over here, when it came to actually using the phone and also gaming on it, it was also quite good, because there's also some AI virtualization which gives you that extra bit of boost. Furthermore, when it came to longer gaming sessions, I actually found that the phone didn't heat up all that much. And this is thanks to the fact that Oppo have fitted the largest vapor chamber that's ever found in a Reno phone. And yes, indeed, it seemed to have done a pretty good job, at least from my own tests. Now, another thing that goes hand in hand when it comes to your overall performance is software. And as I did mention, it is actually pretty fluid when it came to jumping between different apps. And this is also thanks to the fact that you've got Android 15 and ColorOS 15 that come out the box, at least at the time of filming. You've got 5 years worth of OS updates and 6 years worth of security support, which is actually stonkingly good and in line with some of the flagship phones out there in the market. However, it is actually quite disappointing to see that you've got quite a lot of bloatware. Yes, indeed, when you first set up the phone, you'll notice that there are a lot of apps that you've probably not come across or indeed probably never use. So that's probably the first thing that you're going to want to do is uninstall or disable them. Thankfully, this can be done and therefore means that you're not exactly locked into using these apps, but I just wish that Oppo would scale down the amount of bloatware that's included. Nonetheless, apart from these complaints, the software itself is actually really well optimized and you've got plenty of customization available too. You actually probably want to spend quite a bit of time tinkering around with the different phone settings, and sometimes it can be hard to find certain settings which are hidden in certain sub-menus. Nonetheless, over here you have got the smart sidebar, which can be handy for quickly accessing certain apps, including some of the built-in AI tools, such as the likes of the AI writer, which can be handy in certain scenarios. You've also got Google Gemini, which is also baked in, and you've also got really useful photo editing tools, which I suspect a lot of people will use, such as the AI Erase, Reflection, Unblur, and Clarity Enhancer. All of which actually do a tremendous job, namely the likes of the AI Erase, which I do think is among one of the best out there aside from what Google provide themselves. Elsewhere, I would also like to highlight that there is an underwater mode. Yes, indeed, this is when it comes to using the camera app, you can actually use it underwater. Thanks to its IP68 and 69 rating, it gives you that extra bit of versatility. And the way that the manufacturers optimize the underwater mode makes it actually quite handy. Not only can you use it with gloves or indeed underwater, but also when it comes to taking the phone out of the water, the screen itself also has got good sort of touch responsiveness, even if you've got quite wet hands. So there are definitely things to like and dislike about the software and the raw performance of the Oppo Reno13 Pro 5G, but where it really excels, in my opinion, is when it comes to battery. Here it has got a 5800 milliamp capacity, and for my own controlled benchmarks, I netted a whopping 32 hours and 51 minutes. Yes indeed, it's the longest battery life that I have recorded to date, and in comparison to the vast majority of its competitors, be it flagship or indeed mid-tier or budget smartphones, this one actually comes out on top. This will give you a solid 2 days of medium to light usage. If you're a heavy gamer, expect roughly 1 to 1.5 days, and if you're a light user, then expect over 3 to 4 days. Yes indeed, this phone will really go the distance. Better still, you've also got 80 watts of wired capacity charging, therefore allowing you to go from 1 to 100% in just 49 minutes. So therefore a quick blast of charge with an appropriate Super VOOC charger will give you all that capacity. Now it is worth pointing out that this phone does not have any wireless or reverse charging capabilities. It doesn't really bother me all that much, but I just thought to highlight it in this review. Now to conclude, I would like to talk about some of the other features which are actually quite handy. First off, you have got that 512GB of internal storage with 12GB of RAM and UFS 3.1, therefore combining to provide a pretty fluid and also a good sort of storage capacity. Yes indeed, in comparison to some of its competitors, it's not available as 128 or 256GB, but also similarly is not available as a 1TB model, although that will only be found in certain top-tier flagship phones. Now you have also got good sort of connectivity with dual nano SIM support with an eSIM capability as well. Although it's worth noting over here, only 2 SIMs, be it physical or virtual, will be able to be used simultaneously. Then you've also got dual band Wi-Fi, which goes up to Wi-Fi 6E, and Bluetooth 5.4 with LHD-C5, aptX HD and LDAC among the SBC and AAC codecs. Therefore meaning that you've got good high quality Bluetooth codecs available, therefore reducing the overall transmission loss to your supported wireless earphones, headphones or any sort of Bluetooth device. Then you've also got NFC, which is good for payments, therefore meaning you can use it for contactless, and you've got fantastic stereo speakers. They're actually a little bit more on the warmer side, in other words, giving you a bit more of a V-shaped sound signature and emphasizing a little bit of the highs and the lows, but I actually found it pretty good and engaging and also very loud. You can also customize it with some preset EQs. And you've also got something called Holo Audio, which gives you a spatial sound. It's a nice little touch, not something that I normally would use, but here nonetheless you can fiddle around with it and also customize how it actually affects it in different sorts of scenarios. Finally, I do absolutely love the fact that you have got the O haptics, which give you a good sort of haptic feedback. And in comparison to the vast majority of phones at this price point or indeed cheaper, it is far better. However, I don't think it's quite as advanced as the likes of what you'd find in the Find X8 Pro, which in my opinion feels all that bit more premium. So with all that in mind, can I see myself recommending the Oppo Reno13 Pro 5G? Well, hopefully I've made it clear that throughout this review, I've actually been left really impressed. And indeed, over here, there's certain limitations that you might want to consider. For example, the amount of bloatware that you get out of the box, the fact that the ColorOS could be a little bit better optimized, and the overall chipset performance can't compete with the likes of the Poco F7 Ultra, which is its nearest competitor. However, apart from these sort of factors, the phone actually does tick a lot of boxes. Its overall design is really nice. It's also quite good to hold. You've also got a fantastic rear and front camera configuration. The display is very fluid with that 120Hz refresh rate, and it's also quite nice to look at in terms of the overall color accuracy. You've also got a good set of features such as dual speakers, NFC, and those O haptics, which just make it feel all that bit more premium. And you have also got a really nice set of software features with AI integration, which will certainly be appreciated by certain individuals, namely, for example, the AI eraser feature. Now, given all of this, I can certainly see myself recommending it, and as such, it gets my Best Buy award. Again, I would go as far as saying that it's among one of the best phones that you can buy out there right now, specifically given its overall price point. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below and how you feel it compares to some of its competitors, namely, for example, the likes of the Poco F7 Ultra. If you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.